Ani. Ani. All right. Ani Bojo, well, morning dish nakas, Maingen Dodam, Maman dish nakanik Bama Shebeneshians. Nin Mizimbigowan, then I mean when Dokinama game Mizimbigowan. Oh, wait, it's supposed to be in English, right? Sorry. Just a bit about myself. My mom's Ojibwe, my dad's French, I'm Confucian. So I come to you with a perspective of sometimes I'm beside myself in the way of that experience. What I was wanting to cover in the presentation that is here is recognizing that so much of my upbringing was discovering so much about the fact that our educational system never taught much about Indigenous culture and history. And as we recognize in our society and today, and the reality that all life is precious if we understand each other's history. My dad was French, my mom's Ojibwe, but when I went to school, remember French, Ojibwe, school, September, what's 7 in French? Why is September the 9th month? As a single example, I'm going to school and I was also added to the confusion. I was born in October. How many legs or tentacles does an octopus have? 8. Why is October the 10th month? And it's this kind of confusion that what I've discovered is that the rest of our society doesn't know its own history. How can I expect them to know about Indigenous history? And also to know about the answers or solutions to the problems that we have today from Indigenous culture if we don't know that history. And that was one of the realities that I realized when I was asked to speak as part of this process about postvention, is we need to understand that we can look at all the statistics that are out there, and this being some of the example of some of the statistics. In Aboriginal culture and communities today, the reality is suicide is 5 times greater than non-Native communities. 5 times. So the reality for Indigenous peoples is that suicide is a daily occurrence. But the gloom and doom of it all is not as difficult as for us to realize. How is it that Indigenous people still rise up out of that and still continue? There's still a reason for hope. Those of you that are educators, put up your hand. Okay, who here is a parent? Okay, who here is an educator? Who here has a younger sibling? Who here is an educator? You follow me? You all now have knowledge that you've gained in today's session, and you're going to be gaining some more knowledge. That is the beauty. You now have something to share and teach. So what we're learning today and what we're discovering today about Indigenous cultures as part of an approach, a balanced approach, is what I'm going to try to bring to you, is that we can't just look at the data. But something teachers had to realize, those of you that may not be paying attention, but in June of last year, National Aboriginal Day, June 21st, teachers said, okay, we're done. Then our little bit of acknowledging Aboriginal people one day of the year, even though we are Black History Month, Aboriginal Day. It's like, is there more? Over the summer, there was a preliminary report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. A month and a half ago, the final report was submitted. One of our Supreme Court justices, Beverly McLaughlin, identified that we now have a history equivalent to that of Germany. And what is that? Teachers woke up in September without even realizing it, that Canada is no longer the same. Just like the map changes, so does our history. That we have a history of genocide in this country. But guess what? It's not your fault. There's no room for blame or shame or any of those terms. Because guess what? What was done to Aboriginal peoples was also done to non-Indigenous peoples. Because it was an intention to keep us all in the dark. That's why the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Murray Sinclair, the Justice Murray Sinclair, had identified that this is a job that we have to do, but it's not a job for Indigenous peoples. It's a job for all Canadians. And he put forth an action plan. But some of that action plan requires us to get into an uncomfortable position, to talk about the uncomfortable conversations, to have those discussions that we don't want to talk about, right? Isn't this one of them? So after it happens, we don't want to talk about it. Postvention. Are we still breathing after it happens? Is everyone else still breathing? Those are the ones we need to focus on as well. When Perry was speaking earlier about that journey of that individual, we not only have to acknowledge the spirit of that individual that has passed on, we need to acknowledge the spirit of all of those that are still here, each with an individual path. So the data is one thing, the people are another. We need to recognize they're not identifying how many families have been destroyed by the data of the number of suicides. So we need to expand our awareness that the material and the reality that is Indigenous culture is so much more. In Indigenous Inuit communities up in the north, it's even greater, the relationship and the percentage. So we need to go beyond that. We need to see that there's an informing and an education. This is from the Sudbury Star. Anybody read that? Some of us that don't look the Hollywood Indian, we get passed as something else. Growing up, that was my reality. That was the reality for my sisters. They didn't look Native enough, so they got dismissed. But then they were witnessing all of this stuff. And the irony is, I go back to the reserve, and guess what? Guess who I get treated like? I get treated like the white guy. So I'm stuck in this reality that both sides need to know about both our histories. So when I do that, I need to realize that Indigenous peoples have a different way of seeing the world. And in order for non-Indigenous peoples to see it, Jim Dumont puts this preface out in an article that I used up at the university. And it was from an article called Journey to Daylight Land. It's about seeing through Indigenous eyes. If we read it, if you're willing to choose to understand and sensibly appreciate Native myth and legend, we must be willing, first of all, to do two things. To accept that there is involved here a very special way of seeing the world. And a second and necessary, okay, so there's that part there. The second part is, well, you got to see it, that there's a different way of seeing, and then participate in that way of seeing. Accept it and participate in it. All right, everyone get that? Pretty clear, simple? Because the consequences are, that's what the next paragraph says. If we choose not to acknowledge that Indigenous ways is a different way of seeing and participate in that way of seeing, we don't get the benefit from it. Well, let's apply that to your culture, your gender, your body shape and size. Apply it into the blank and answer me the question. Does the same thing apply? To choose somebody who is women's myth or men's myth. You understand what I'm trying to get at? Or white people's myth. That we need to recognize that first and foremost, as part of Indigenous culture, was acceptance. To accept other. If that wasn't one of the foundational values, guess what? The boat would have been sent packing back to Europe. That is the primary value of Indigenous culture, was that acceptance that you are unique and you have an individual path. And that is why Indigenous peoples did not interfere in the colonization. Because they felt that it was not their place to tell someone what they were doing wrong. They needed to discover on their own. So when we see that as a part of the path, Jim Dumont went further and identified that there was so much more that we needed to do. Over 30 years ago, he recognized in order to educate a person, we need to educate the whole person, not just their brain. But how do we teach? Here's your brain on Western education. And then they get to university, and guess what the professors frustrate with? So, what do you think? And the student goes, 19-year-old sitting in the class going, I don't know. What do you want me to think? And of course, there's your trend for university. Trying to guess what the teacher wants instead of what you think. Why? Because you've been told what to think instead of been honored individually what the student thinks and reverse that role that the student is the teacher and the teachers and administrators are the students. Is that going to happen anytime soon? But do we need to see that? Because part of the reason for why individuals end it is because no one is listening. Because individuals are trying to find themselves. And in our culture and our teaching and our tradition, that there's more aspects to us besides the mind. And that our mind is so much more. Is that we see in our teachings that there's the dream catcher and the medicine wheel. But one of them specifically, the dream catcher, is about the interconnectedness of all things. But the medicine wheel, if we look at the medicine wheel, this is an ancient tool. It's over 5,000 years old with a prophecy and a teaching in it And this teaching, this prophecy, speaks about many things. Talks about all of these aspects. If we understand them, and we see them right there. The eastern, southern, western directions. We understand the acknowledgement like a compass. But it's also recognized that east also represents something else. It also represents, as it fades into childhood, youth, adults, and those that got snow on the roof, you know what I'm talking about, are elders. But it also recognizes in our ancient prophecy that symbol recognized for 5,000 years, there was an understanding that all those cultures would come to live here in North America. And each brought with them a physical, a mental, and emotional, spiritual balance. If we're going to teach that whole person, we can't just teach to the brain. If we're going to deal with a child or a person experiencing something, it's not mental illness. It's all body illness, all mental illness, all spiritual illness, all emotional illness. It's not just one. If we hear only mental illness and ignore the body, that's where maybe the problem is, or the emotion. When somebody is emotionally ill, they're whole ill. Understanding that tool, I took this and I worked with the North Shore Tribal Council, and I went further to develop a tool. Recognizing these teachings, I blended them with, whip through this one here. What was that? Anybody familiar with the 7 grandfather teachings? Anybody? Anybody? We've got a few. Okay, the 7 grandfather teachings. They're values. Every culture's got them. There's the values of humility, honesty, truth, love, respect, courage, and wisdom. In our language and our teachings, we understand the value of these. But when we look at this as a symbol, as a single element in our teachings and traditions, we need all of them, not just one of them. If you are absent with one of them, then all of them fall apart. But if we go to this model here, this model is a model of the 7 stages of grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I've added another element to it. This is that she had a 5-stage, added 2 more. The 2 that she added was the immobilization stage and then the testing stage. But if we take each of the 7 grandfather teachings and bring it in line with each of those stages of grief, that's what I'm proposing. But we add and build onto them. Where there is humility, when a loss happens, a trauma happens, you trip and fall down, you get humbled. You stop and realize you ain't in control. But when you get to that next stage, we talk about denial in that stage of grief. What's the opposite of denial? The truth. But in our language, those 2 words are powerful. The word truth is deh, bwe, win. The word heart is deh. So truth literally means to speak from the heart. And understanding that truth, we need to move through each of those. And when you have anger and frustration, what it was identified in some of the presenters, that when you see that pain, we see that frustration, we see that hurt, how do you heal it? With love. And when we get into that bargaining stage, we see that let's get honest with ourselves. We can't be making a promise and follow through when we don't have control over the reality. Honesty. And depression. That next stage, if you have a respect for yourself and you have a respect for others, you're not alone. But depression is a alone thing. In our language, the word respect is minon den dih moin. The deh is heart. The dih is about mutual benefit. When I say being again, that means welcome. Being deh again, that means you come in to my home so that we benefit. The word love is zaga deh win. Because love is not singular, it's mutual. And once you've got that understanding of that respect and you move out of that process of depression and you move into that testing stage, and that's the one she added. But testing isn't just something you do. It's a process of journeying. That we move through a cycle, an understanding, but it takes courage to take that step. Andrew knows that. Harriet knows that. To take that step takes courage. But that courage you need to have to realize you need to face what it is that you've lost. Once you've faced it, then you move forward to forgiving them or yourself. And then you release it. And then you test it again. And you do that again and again. As I've identified when I spoke with the committee, this cannot be the only event. This is not a pill to fix the problem. This should be one of 3 more, a total of 4. Cycles through each season. If you want to deal with a loss, talk to me next winter. then I'll know that you've gone through the healing of that loss through each season. Because physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you've processed all those elements. That is what I'm saying is the key. A balanced approach to healing involves understanding each other's history and finding solutions in both for a shared reality and a shared problem. You want to find a solution? Learn about each other. And that's where the solution lies. At the end of the day, we have hope, but we can't do it alone. Has anybody learned anything so far? Is anybody inspired to want to learn something more than they already know? In the folder has this handout. So you've got this tool that shows and talks and explains those elements, and it gives you the language elements of the 7 grandfather teachings. You now have a tool. I developed this for the North Shore Tribal Council, but I recognize we are going to give it life. Right? Thank you.